The hospital corridor was unnaturally quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the heavy kind, the kind that presses against the chest and makes every breath feel louder than it should. The fluorescent lights reflected on the polished floor, creating long white lines that stretched endlessly in both directions, as if time itself had been pulled thin. He sat alone on a narrow chair, hands clasped together, elbows resting on his knees. His posture was familiar. It was the same position he took in boardrooms when negotiations reached a critical point. Leaning forward. Focused. Controlled. But here, control was an illusion. The clock on the wall ticked with mechanical indifference. Each second passed without permission, without negotiation, without concern for who waited beneath it. Tick, tick, tick. For the first time in decades, he felt powerless. He had built an entire life around the idea that problems could be solved, that obstacles existed to be overcome, that if something stood in his way, it meant he simply hadn't applied enough effort, intelligence, or persistence yet. That belief had served him well. Until now. His fingers tightened unconsciously. The skin around his knuckles turned pale. He loosened his grip, then clasped his hands again, trying to steady himself. The body often understands the truth before the mind is willing to accept it. Across the hallway, a door remained closed. Behind that door, a procedure was taking place, one he had approved, reviewed, signed for, and trusted. Every detail had been explained. Every risk calculated. Every reassurance delivered in calm, professional language. He had listened carefully. Or at least, he thought he had. A nurse passed by, walking quickly, eyes fixed ahead. She didn't look at him. No one did. In that hallway, everyone carried their own private fear, wrapped neatly behind polite expressions and lowered voices. He leaned back against the wall and closed his eyes for a moment. Memories surfaced uninvited. Not of wealth. Not of success. But of a small room with peeling paint and a window that never quite closed. Of cold nights where blankets were thin and promises were thick. Of a woman, tired, strong, and endlessly patient, counting coins at a kitchen table while pretending not to be worried. His mother never complained. She simply adapted. Time is all we really have, she used to say. And it goes faster than we think. He hadn't understood then. Back then, time felt endless. Back then, the future felt negotiable. The sound of footsteps pulled him back to the present. The door at the end of the corridor opened slowly. Not abruptly. Not urgently. Slowly, as if whoever was on the other side understood the weight of what was about to be said. The doctor stepped out. Tall. Composed. Experienced. His movements were careful, deliberate. He removed his mask and held it briefly in his hand, as if considering his next words. That pause was enough. The businessman stood up immediately. How is he? His voice came out steady, trained by years of high-stakes conversations. The doctor didn't answer right away. He took a breath. A deep one. We need to stop the procedure. The words were simple. Professional. And devastating. Stop. The word felt foreign in his mouth. What do you mean, stop? The doctor met his eyes. There are signs we can't ignore anymore. Signs. That word echoed. Signs had been everywhere. Subtle. Quiet. Easy to dismiss when life moved fast and priorities were clear, or at least, seemed clear at the time. The businessman felt his legs weaken slightly and sat back down. The doctor continued speaking, explaining complications, risks, possibilities, but the words blurred together, fading into background noise. His mind had already traveled elsewhere. He remembered saying, countless times, after this project, after this deal, after things slow down. They never did. He remembered choosing efficiency over conversation, solutions over listening, progress over presence. He had called it responsibility. Now, sitting in that hallway, he wondered what it had really been. The doctor placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. We'll do everything we can, he said quietly. The businessman nodded. But for the first time in his life, he understood something deeply unsettling. Doing everything you can does not guarantee the outcome you want. As the doctor walked away, the corridor returned to silence. Tick, tick, tick. The clock continued its relentless march forward, indifferent to regret, unmoved by realization. And sitting there alone, he felt the weight of a truth he had spent his entire life avoiding. Some lessons don't arrive when you're ready. They arrive when time decides you've waited long enough. And sometimes, they arrive late. Very late. The silence of the hospital corridor followed him even as his mind drifted backward in time. He had learned early how to sit quietly, how to wait without complaining, how to observe without asking questions. Those skills had been shaped long before boardrooms and hospitals, shaped in a small house where noise meant worry and silence meant endurance. His childhood was defined by limits. Limits on food. Limits on comfort. Limits on hope. There were mornings when he woke up already tired. Not from work, but from uncertainty. The kind of tiredness that comes from not knowing if the day would bring stability or another small disappointment. His mother worked endlessly. Jobs came and went, none of them lasting, all of them demanding. She left early and returned late, carrying exhaustion on her shoulders like an invisible weight. Still, she never allowed despair to show. "Keep your head down," she used to say. "Do what needs to be done. Tomorrow will come whether we're ready or not." He listened. At school, he learned quickly that poverty had a sound. It was in the shoes that scuffed louder because they were worn thin. In the lunches packed too neatly because there wasn't much inside. In the way teachers spoke more gently, as if kindness could compensate for inequality. He learned not to ask. Asking made people uncomfortable. Instead, he watched. He watched the children whose parents arrived in clean cars. He watched the confidence they carried, the ease with which they spoke about vacations and plans. He watched and told himself that one day he would never feel small again. That desire hardened into determination. He took every opportunity that appeared, no matter how small. Extra work. Late hours. Responsibilities others avoided. He became reliable, not because he wanted praise, but because reliability was safer than hope. Hope disappointed. Discipline did not. By the time he was a teenager, he had already learned to trade comfort for progress. Sleep for stability. Presence for preparation. He told himself it was temporary. Everything was temporary, he believed. But life has a way of turning temporary choices into permanent habits. His mother aged quietly. Her hands grew rougher. Her pauses longer. He noticed but said nothing. There was always something urgent demanding attention. When she fell ill, it didn't come as a shock, only as an interruption. He visited when he could. He called when reminded. He told himself that providing meant caring, even when his chair at her bedside stayed empty longer than it should have. She never complained. She smiled instead. "You're doing well," she told him once, her voice soft. "That's all I wanted." Those words stayed with him. They became justification. They allowed him to keep moving forward without looking back. Success arrived gradually, then suddenly. Promotions came. Recognition followed. Responsibility multiplied. He learned to speak confidently, even when uncertain. To appear calm, even when exhausted. People admired him. But admiration is quiet company. The habits formed in childhood followed him into adulthood. Waiting. Suppressing. Enduring. He learned to postpone emotion the same way he postponed rest. Later became his favorite word. Later, he would slow down. Later, he would reconnect. Later, he would be present. But later kept moving. And sitting now in a hospital hallway, with nothing left to distract him, he finally recognized the pattern he had mistaken for strength. He had mastered survival. But survival had slowly replaced living. And for the first time, he wondered what that had cost him, and whether the bill had already come due. Success did not arrive with celebration. It arrived quietly, disguised as opportunity. The first promotion felt less like victory and more like relief. Relief that effort had not been wasted. Relief that discipline had been noticed. Relief that survival was finally turning into progress. He accepted without hesitation. Longer hours followed. Then longer days. Responsibilities multiplied, and with them came expectations. He learned quickly that saying yes was safer than saying no. That reliability opened doors. That consistency built trust. And trust created momentum. He became known as someone who delivered results. Someone who stayed late. Someone who handled pressure without complaint. His name began to circulate in rooms he had never imagined entering. With each step forward, something else quietly stepped back. Phone calls went unanswered. Invitations declined. Moments postponed. He justified it easily. This was the price of growth. He told himself that success was not selfish, it was necessary. That stability required sacrifice. That presence could wait until the foundation was solid. The foundation, however, was never solid enough. Money changed his surroundings before it changed him. Apartments became larger. Offices became quieter. Cars became smoother. But the rhythm of his life stayed the same. Fast, focused, forward. He measured time in deadlines. Achievements replaced conversations. Progress replaced reflection. People admired his discipline. They mistook his distance for professionalism. He allowed the confusion, because it protected him from questions he didn't want to answer. At home, silence became familiar. Not the peaceful kind, the empty kind. The kind that fills rooms without being invited. He learned to live with it the same way he learned to live with pressure, by ignoring it. When relationships strained, he explained with logic. When emotions surfaced, he redirected toward solutions. He believed that love could be managed. That caring deeply meant providing consistently. That being responsible meant being distant. Those beliefs worked, until they didn't. There were moments when doubt surfaced briefly. Late at night, alone, staring at a ceiling that felt too high. During holidays when conversations felt forced and time felt borrowed. During milestones that passed without presence. But doubt never stayed long. Work always called louder. And he answered. The empire he built did not rise suddenly. It accumulated. Carefully. Methodically. Each success reinforcing the last, each achievement narrowing his focus further. He became someone people depended on, and someone few truly knew. And without realizing it, the survival skills of his childhood had evolved into habits of adulthood. He no longer feared lack. He feared stillness. Because stillness left space for questions. And questions threatened the identity he had spent a lifetime constructing. Sitting now in that hospital hallway, stripped of distractions, he understood something painfully clear. He had built a life that functioned perfectly, as long as nothing went wrong. And now, something had. The first warning came quietly. Not as pain, but as inconvenience. Fatigue that sleep didn't fix. Shortness of breath he blamed on stress. Headaches he dismissed as dehydration. A tightness in the chest that appeared only during moments he chose to ignore. His body spoke softly at first. He responded with silence. Doctor's appointments were postponed. Checkups rescheduled. Exams delayed. He convinced himself that successful people didn't have time to be sick, and sickness, in his mind, was a weakness reserved for those who stopped moving. He increased his pace instead. More meetings. More travel. More responsibility. The faster he went, the less he felt. Or so he believed. Colleagues noticed changes before he did. A shorter temper. Less patience. A constant urgency, as if time itself were chasing him. He laughed it off, calling it ambition. Calling it focus. Calling it drive. At home, concern grew quietly. Questions were met with reassurance. Worries were answered with statistics. He knew how to sound convincing. He had built a career doing exactly that. "I'm fine," became his favorite lie. And like all good lies, he repeated it often enough to believe it. The body, however, keeps records. It remembers every ignored signal. Every night cut short. Every meal rushed. Every breath held during stress. It waits. It adapts. And when adaptation ends, it demands attention. The second warning was impossible to ignore. It happened in a moment that should have been ordinary. A routine day. A familiar environment. A conversation halfway finished when the room tilted slightly, just enough to make him pause. His vision blurred for a second. Just a second. Enough to scare him. He sat down, took a breath, told himself it was nothing. That fear was exaggerated. That anxiety was playing tricks on him. But fear has a way of planting seeds. That night, alone, he searched symptoms online, briefly, cautiously, stopping before the answers became uncomfortable. He closed the laptop and promised himself he would schedule an appointment. He didn't, because something always came up. Weeks passed, then months. The symptoms evolved, slowly, subtly, like erosion, invisible day to day, undeniable over time. Sleep became shallow. Mornings became heavier. His chest felt crowded, as if something was occupying space that didn't belong there. Still, he pushed forward, because stopping meant admitting vulnerability. And vulnerability threatened the image he had built, the man who endured, the man who solved, the man who never slowed down. Then came the incident. Public, sudden, unforgiving. A sharp pain this time. Real. Paralyzing. Not the kind you reason with. Not the kind you negotiate away. It stole his breath mid-sentence and dropped him into silence. The room froze. People panicked. He didn't. Not at first. He tried to stand, to speak, to maintain control. But control abandoned him without explanation. By the time he realized what was happening, he was already being helped into a chair. Faces hovered above him, distorted by concern. Voices overlapped. Time fractured. And in that fractured moment, one thought surfaced, clear, terrifying, undeniable. This is serious. The hospital became unavoidable. The tests came quickly, efficiently, coldly. Machines hummed. Screens glowed. Professionals spoke in measured tones that revealed nothing and everything at the same time. He listened without interrupting. For the first time in decades. The diagnosis wasn't immediate, but the concern was. And concern, when it comes from professionals trained not to panic, carries weight. Sitting alone afterward, wrapped in sterile quiet, he felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Not pain. Fear. Pure. Focused. Honest fear. Not of dying, but of realizing, too late, that he had mistaken endurance for invincibility. And as he waited for the next test, the next result, the next explanation, one truth began to form slowly, uncomfortably, undeniably. His body had been asking for help for years. And he had refused to listen. The waiting was worse than the pain. Pain was honest. It announced itself. Waiting allowed the mind to wander, and his mind, now unguarded, wandered into places he had avoided for decades. The hospital room became a mirror. Not the physical kind, but the kind that reflects choices. He lay there, listening to the faint mechanical rhythm of the monitors, each beep marking time he could no longer pretend was unlimited. Hours passed without clarity. Doctors came and went, offering partial explanations wrapped in cautious language. Further tests are needed. We want to be sure. We don't want to rush conclusions. Each sentence stretched his patience thinner. He wanted certainty. Numbers. Outcomes. Probabilities. Instead, he was forced into stillness. And stillness exposed everything. For the first time in years, he had no meetings to attend, no calls to return, no problems to solve. His phone lay silent on the small table beside the bed, not because there were no messages, but because he could no longer escape into them. And in that silence, faces appeared. His son's face first. Not as a child, but as he was now, older, quieter, more distant than he remembered. He realized, with a discomfort that tightened his throat, that he couldn't recall the last real conversation they had. Not a logistical exchange. Not advice delivered like a lecture. A conversation. He remembered promises postponed. When things calmed down. After this project. Next month. Months became years. His son had stopped asking. That realization hurt more than any physical symptom. Then came the memory of his wife, her patience wearing thin not through arguments, but through resignation. The way concern had slowly transformed into silence. Silence into routine. Routine into emotional distance. He had been present in the house, but absent in the marriage. The doctors returned late that evening. 2 of them this time. Their expressions were controlled, professional, but heavier than before. They sat. That alone told him everything. They explained the condition carefully, methodically. They avoided dramatic words, but the meaning settled in his chest with undeniable weight. This wasn't minor. This wasn't something that could be ignored any longer. It required immediate decisions. Invasive procedures. Risk. He asked the right questions. He listened. He nodded. But internally, something fractured. Not fear, acceptance. The kind that arrives when denial finally collapses. After they left, he stared at the ceiling and felt something break loose inside him. A pressure he had carried for decades released itself silently. He cried. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Quietly. Tears slid into his hairline and disappeared without ceremony. No one noticed. No one needed to. They were not tears of panic. They were tears of regret. Regret for conversations avoided. For dinners skipped. For birthdays remembered too late. For moments traded for metrics and numbers that now felt absurdly small. His phone buzzed. A message from his son. Simple. Dad, I'm here. 2 words nearly undid him. Because they carried everything he had almost lost. When his family arrived the next morning, the room felt different. Smaller. Heavier. Real. He tried to speak casually. To soften the moment. But his voice betrayed him. They talked about practical things at first. Procedures, schedules, logistics. But beneath every word was an unspoken understanding. This was no longer theoretical. Time had become fragile. And for the first time in his life, he understood that success had protected him from many things, but not from consequence. Not from the cost of absence. As the day progressed, plans were made. Forms signed. Consents given. Each signature felt like surrender. But also, strangely, like honesty. That night, alone again, he made a quiet decision. If he was given more time, it would not be spent the same way. Not chasing control. Not avoiding vulnerability. But reclaiming presence. He didn't know if he would get the chance. But for the first time, he was ready to live as if it mattered. The morning arrived heavier than the nights before. Not because of fear, but because there were no more delays left to negotiate. Every excuse he had used in life, every later, every soon, every after this, had finally run out. Today demanded an answer. The hospital room was quiet, almost respectful, as if it understood the gravity of the moment. The machines continued their steady rhythm, indifferent to what they represented. To them, he was data. To himself, he was a man standing at the edge of everything he had postponed. A nurse entered and asked how he had slept. He almost laughed. Sleep had been shallow, fragmented by thoughts that refused to line up neatly. He had drifted between memories and imagined futures, between regrets and fragile hopes. There were moments when he convinced himself this was just another obstacle, something to overcome, manage, and move past. And moments when he knew it was something else entirely. Something final in its honesty. As preparations began, he felt strangely calm. Not confident. Calm. The kind of calm that comes when resistance is exhausted and acceptance takes its place. They explained the procedure again, slowly, as if repetition might soften reality. Risks. Outcomes. Contingencies. He signed the forms with steady hands, noticing how surreal it felt to authorize strangers to enter his body and decide his fate. For decades, he had signed documents that affected thousands of lives. This one affected only his. Yet it carried more weight than all the others combined. When his family arrived, the room filled with a quiet intensity. No one wanted to speak too much. Words felt fragile, as if saying the wrong thing might tip the balance. His wife adjusted his blanket, a simple gesture that carried years of shared history. Her eyes lingered on his face longer than usual, as if committing it to memory. He realized then how rarely he had allowed himself to be truly seen. His son stood near the bed, unsure where to place his hands, his posture caught between adulthood and the child he once was. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgment of distance, and of the possibility that it might finally close. "I'll be here," his son said. "Not we." It mattered. As they wheeled him toward the operating room, the corridor stretched endlessly. The ceiling lights passed overhead like silent markers, each one stripping away another illusion of control. For the first time in his life, he wasn't thinking about outcomes. He was thinking about meaning. Inside the operating room, the air felt colder, sharper. The team moved efficiently, without urgency but without hesitation. Introductions were made again, names he would not remember, voices that blended into the hum of equipment. He was positioned carefully, methodically. And then, unexpectedly, doubt surfaced. Not doubt about the doctors. Doubt about himself. About the way he had lived. About the priorities he had defended so fiercely. About the belief that strength meant endurance rather than balance. As the anesthesiologist spoke to him, explaining each step, he focused on the sound of the voice, calm, grounded, human. It anchored him as the world began to blur at the edges. "Count backwards," someone said. He tried. But before the numbers faded, a thought emerged with startling clarity. "If I wake up, I will not live the same way." The darkness came quickly after that. When consciousness returned, it did so violently. Pain cut through the haze, sharp and undeniable. His chest felt heavy, unfamiliar. Breathing required effort. The simple act of opening his eyes felt like work. He was alive. That fact registered slowly, cautiously, as if his mind needed proof before accepting it. Voices surrounded him, controlled, professional, but tense. He caught fragments of conversation. Adjustments. Monitoring. Observation. Something wasn't right. A doctor leaned into his field of vision, face calm but serious. There were complications during the procedure. The sentence echoed. Not screamed. Not whispered. Delivered with the weight of someone who knew it would change everything. They explained that his body had reacted unpredictably. That systems had responded slower than expected. That what should have been straightforward had demanded rapid decisions. They had stabilized him. But stability was not resolution. Hours turned into days. Recovery did not follow a clean line upward. Progress came in increments so small they were almost insulting. Each improvement was followed by a setback, fatigue, pain, weakness he had never experienced before. His body was no longer an ally he could command. It was a partner demanding negotiation. Then came the meeting. 2 specialists. Closed door. Serious tone. They showed him scans, charts, comparisons. Evidence that the damage had not been sudden, it had been accumulating quietly for years. Stress. Neglect. Ignored warnings. The procedure hadn't betrayed him. His past choices had. They spoke about limitations. Adjustments. Permanent changes to how he would live, work, and manage his energy. There would be no return to the pace he once considered normal. Not if he wanted to survive. Not if he wanted quality. He listened without interrupting. No arguments. No denial. Because something inside him had already accepted the truth. That evening, alone again, he stared at the ceiling, not searching for answers, but acknowledging them. He thought about all the times he had overridden exhaustion. All the moments he had dismissed concern as weakness. All the people who had tried to slow him down, and how he had quietly resented them for it. Now he understood. They weren't trying to limit him. They were trying to save him. His hands rested on his chest, trembling slightly. The tremor frightened him at first, then reassured him. It meant he was still here, still capable of feeling, still capable of choosing differently. He reached for his phone and sent a message to his son. "Tomorrow, come early. I want to talk. Not about treatment. Not about business. About life." Because surviving the procedure had taught him something no success ever had. That life doesn't demand perfection. It demands presence. And for the first time, he was ready to offer it. The morning did not announce itself with hope. It arrived quietly, almost cautiously, as if unsure whether it was welcome. He was awake before the light reached the room. Not because of pain this time, but because his mind no longer knew how to sleep the way it used to. Rest had become something deliberate, something learned again, step by step. The hospital room felt temporary now. Not because he was ready to leave, but because he no longer belonged to the man who had arrived there weeks before. When his son entered, carrying that same coffee he never drank, he noticed something immediately. His son looked older. Not physically. Emotionally. As if the distance between them had forced both to grow in directions they never discussed. They sat. No rush. No agenda. Just presence. "I kept thinking you'd wake up and ask about work," his son said softly. "About deals. About numbers." He smiled faintly. "I almost did." They both understood what that meant. "I don't hate you," his son continued, voice steady but tight. "But I learned how to live without you being around. And that changes things." He closed his eyes briefly, letting the truth settle without defense. "I thought providing was enough," he said. "I didn't know I was teaching you how to live without me." Silence followed, not heavy, not awkward. Honest. They talked slowly, carefully, about childhood moments remembered differently, about expectations never spoken, about love that existed but didn't know how to show itself. No one rushed forgiveness. They didn't need to. Later, when his wife came, the conversation deepened further. There was no dramatic reunion, no cinematic confession, just exhaustion meeting truth. "I already lost you once," she said. "I just didn't know how to explain that to you." That sentence stayed with him for days. Recovery dragged on. Progress was real but unsatisfying. His body demanded patience in ways his mind resisted. Some mornings he felt strong, others fragile. He learned to accept both without judgment. Discharge day arrived without celebration. Homecoming wasn't triumphant. It was humbling. The house hadn't changed, he had. He noticed the quiet first. The kind of quiet that isn't empty, but waiting. Waiting to be filled with intention instead of noise. He began rebuilding life the way one rebuilds after a fire, carefully deciding what deserved to return and what was better left behind. He reduced work dramatically. Not as a temporary adjustment, but as a permanent boundary. He explained to partners that he would no longer trade health for urgency. Some understood. Some didn't. He let them go. For the first time, walking away felt like strength. Days slowed. Mornings became intentional. He sat with his coffee instead of walking with it. He watched light move across walls. He listened to conversations fully, without preparing responses. He learned the weight of attention. Physically, limitations remained. His body reminded him often, through fatigue, tightness, weakness, that the past could not be undone. But emotionally, something expanded. He became present at dinners. He asked questions and waited for answers. He apologized, not theatrically, but consistently. Months passed. One evening, sitting alone outside, he realized something unsettling. He didn't miss the old life. He missed the illusion of importance. And once he named that, it lost its power. He watched his son talk about future plans without fear that he needed approval. He watched his wife relax into conversations that no longer felt like negotiations for attention. Time no longer felt like an enemy. It felt like a companion, fragile but honest. He understood now that the procedure didn't save him. It interrupted him, forced him to confront a life built on endurance instead of meaning. He had spent years proving he could handle more. Now he was learning to choose what deserved him. There were still moments of regret, quiet ones, late at night, when he mourned the years that couldn't be recovered. But regret no longer controlled him. It informed him. And that made all the difference.